Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, November 9th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the 2025 elections and a national shift in favor of the Democratic Party from a variety of different demographic groups ranging from race to economic background to age all across this country as we see a complete abandonment of the President of the United States and in part Republicans due to what the Oval Office is doing, what the White House is doing, what Republicans in Congress are doing. The 2025 elections were abysmal for the Republican Party in a multitude of ways, and we are just now getting the data that helps us really visualize exactly how dire the situation was this past Tuesday amongst a variety of different groups. And the reason why I want to bring this up is because after the 2024 presidential election, there was, a lot of conversation. How was it that Donald Trump was able to build out the most diverse coalition for Republicans across the country, across demographic groups in this country? And so what we saw was that Donald Trump was simultaneously doing well amongst Muslim voters in Michigan over the Biden-Harris administration's stance on the war in Gaza. They were gaining support amongst Latino voters in Nevada and Arizona and Florida and Texas because of the southern border crisis that was associated with the Biden-Harris administration. They were gaining amongst young voters in North Carolina in record ways at university campuses for a variety of different issues, but primarily cost of living and housing costs. I mean, you were seeing that Donald Trump in 2024 did what many Republicans thought might have been impossible in previous years, which was build together a coalition primarily built up, yes, of white voters, as it has maintained through the past half century, but also to a combination of minority voters shifting over. After all, the difference in white vote share for Donald Trump in 2020 versus 2024 actually went down relative to the last election. So it was minority voters that absolutely put Donald Trump over the finish line. And so in understanding that, I want us to really take a look. This is an article from NPR released at the end of November, updated in January of 2025. We never really had the opportunity to dive into it, but I want us really to understand exactly what had happened here. There were some clear trends that they summarize here. Democrats lost ground with voters under 30 in nearly every single swing state. There was a seismic shift with Latino voters in this country. Black voters supported Democrats in lower numbers compared to previous election years. I mean, you would see here that in a multitude of ways that the Democrats were able to mitigate a lot of these losses that they had suffered in 2024. You're looking at, Black voters trailing off from the Democrats in 2024, young voters trailing off, Latino voters trailing off, and you see here, too, that, yes, white voters were a high share of the electorate and voted in large numbers for Trump, but they didn't expand, and you can, again, look back at the exit polls and see this, and also, there was a political realignment taking place, not just on education and race, but also by age. So, in visualizing this too, for instance, I mean, we can take a look at this a little bit later. I want us to actually look at the 2025 shifts here in these races across Virginia and New Jersey and other states where on the national level, well, what we're looking at least when it comes down to some of these toss-up, or not toss-ups, but I guess races that we were hyper-fixated on, like Virginia, like New Jersey, demographics ranging from men, women, white voters, Hispanic and Latino voters, Black voters. I mean, it is so incredible to see how this shift really did make a difference. And the only real ones that you didn't really see much of a shift on were that, wealthier voters, 100K plus, median income. You were seeing that the shift there wasn't as prominent for the Democrats. Voters 65 plus, the shift wasn't as prominent. White voters, it wasn't as prominent. And again, it never really has been. And when you take a look, for instance, Black voters only shifted by 9 points, but after all, they were already voting for Democrats by 77, this time by 86. No matter how you cut it, though, every single demographic group shifted towards the left. And in many cases, in fascinatingly massive ways. For instance, Asian American voters, a huge voting portion of the electorate in Northern Virginia, shifted overwhelmingly in favor of the Democratic Party by 41 points relative to the last election. Right? Black voters shifted by 9. Hispanic voters shifted by 25 points. Women across the country shifted 29 points. Men shifted by 17. The numbers are clear. And the way in which Donald Trump was able to win that last election, again, I want us to remind ourselves that without Latino voters shifting in the way that, they had in 2024, it's very possible that Donald Trump could have lost a state like Georgia. Or that in North Carolina, when, Trump made quote-unquote eye-popping gains with young voters, sure, 100%, what did that mean for a state that was decided by just 3 points? When you look at 2020, for instance, sure, Biden did not win the state in 2020, but he only lost it by 1.3. Kamala Harris losing 15 points on the margin amongst young voters in 2024 absolutely explains how a state that goes by 1.3 for Trump turns into a state that goes by 3.2. Seemingly not a big difference, but absolutely can be explained by some of these shifts. Sure, Hispanic voters shifted over too, black voters as well, but again, that's a big problem here for the Democratic Party in a state like North Carolina, in a state like Arizona, where Donald Trump's seeing double-digit gains with Latinos. But first of all, the shift was already happening. In 2016, Hillary Clinton came within 3.5% in Arizona. But 4 years later, it was Hispanic voters that we saw some hemorrhaging between 2016 and 2020, but only by 6 points, enough that it was able to be mitigated by the pretty substantial gains that Biden made relative to Clinton amongst white voters. But in 2024, white voters backed Trump by roughly the same amount they did in 2020, but a big reason why Trump won by 6, even better than his 2016 victory, was Latino voters. That went from being Clinton plus 30 to Harris plus 10. Arizona has one of the highest percentages of Hispanic voters in terms of their total voting populace in the country. What we know, and the point here that I'm trying to make, is that the margins were made by shifts in 2024 amongst key demographic groups that are now finding their way back towards the Democrats. Nevada, Latinos and Asian Americans tipped the state in Trump's favor. I mean, look at the 2016 and 2020 results. They're identical. 2.4 for Clinton and 2.4 for Biden. Why is that? Well, the demographics were roughly identical, right? But then they shifted overwhelmingly. Look at this number. Asian American voters go from plus 29 for Biden to plus 23 for Trump. Hispanic voters go from plus 26 for Biden to plus 2 for Trump in Nevada. In Michigan, younger voters and Latino voters abandoned Kamala Harris in this state. Massive, massive changes, right? In Wisconsin, young voters and black voters shifted tremendously. So again, Pennsylvania, you see it too. The point is that in every single one of these states that Donald Trump won in 2024, Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina, you ask that question, Democrats have been asking on repeat, why? Well, the demographic data is as clear as day. So what does the 2025 data tell us? That a lot of these voters that might have seemingly been against Kamala Harris and the Democrats before are finding their way back towards the Democratic Party. Or at least those who are enticed and excited enough to turn out in an election like a random governor's race in Virginia is really what makes the moment. And I think a good example of, just how strong that return is in favor of Democrats, you can take a look at the Attorney General's race in Virginia, where this race was meant to be one where Republicans potentially could have won, and there was no expectation that Jay Jones would have done as well as he did. After all, by the end of the night, he ended up outperforming Kamala Harris in the state of Virginia. But this was the state, and this was the race where, Jason Miyares, Cuban descent, the Republicans were saying if anyone is going to, hold on to portions of the Trump electorate, it's going to be him, and he's going to improve upon it because he is someone who's running against a Democrat who has just had all these scandals come about him. And yet, in the breakdown by race, and you can see it amongst young voters too, but by race, we can look at 18 to 29, you're talking a 30-point margin here, a 25-point margin. But amongst race, black voters back him 89 to 11. Latino voters by 22. Asian voters by 55. Looking at those 2024 exit polls, granted, the presidential level was about 7 points more conservative than the state of Virginia. But either way, that doesn't make up, a 7-point difference doesn't make up, for instance, amongst, we can scroll down to race, a 6-point gap between Harris and Trump among Latino voters. There clearly has been a change in mind. A change in mind that can be visually seen. If the results were like how they are now, on the national level in many of these states, the presidential election of 2024 would look less like this and more like this. With Kamala Harris winning practically every single battleground state and winning over some of these states by even larger margins than that of Joe Biden. Virginia would have been safe. Colorado would have been safe. New Mexico would have been safe. But we didn't see that in 2024 because a lot of minority voters had largely turned away from the Democratic Party. But being very blunt and honest as to where we are right now, where we are with the, presidential election versus the 2025 election, on one end, yes, the electorate's going to look different. Those who are enraged with the administration are going to turn out and vote, and by nature, different demographics will in fact be more liberal. But at the same time, there are sizable portions and sections of the states and country that voted on Tuesday that are the same voters that came out and turned out for Trump that are now turning out for Democrats to express their displeasure with the President of the United States. What we know is that on broad strokes, the results here are so indicative of what could be a disaster for Republicans in 2026 if they do not prevent it. If they do not find a way to get around not just this drop-off amongst young voters and Latino voters and black voters and Asian voters, but you are seeing it amongst millennials. You're seeing it amongst Gen X. You're seeing it amongst those who make an income of less than $50,000 when, yes, Democrats were winning them before by 2 and now by 26. Because who feels the impacts of SNAP benefits being frozen? Who feels the impacts of a government shutdown? Who feels the impacts of a dysfunctional Republican trifecta in Washington, D.C.? And that can explain a lot of these results. Because no matter how you cut it, not a single demographic shifted in favor of the Republican Party. And hold the 2024 election last Tuesday, the result would look a lot closer to this. And that's what 2026 might look like as well. No guarantee on that front, but the exit polling data alongside the voting data is pretty clear-cut. And what it tells me is that Republicans are going to have to find a way to really make that argument to minority voters and young voters again, and lower income voters that they might have been able to in 2024. But it seems to have become increasingly more difficult as voters abandon the president, including many in his own base, and as they turn to an opposition party to oppose what's happening in Washington, D.C. And so far, it is the Democrats in every single race that took place on Tuesday who saw these substantial swings in full force, enough so that they were able to count on victories in every single contested race. And all of those victories came to fruition in a massive blue wave not even a week ago, and results that tell us we might see one in 2026 as well. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.